Bang, 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 bang. Remnant 2, a game made by Gunfire Games, a follow-up to the smash hit Remnant from the Ashes. But where does this game shape up next to the first game in the series? How does it compare to other Souls-likes within the genre? And how do I like the procedurally generated gameplay? Let's find out. But first and foremost, if you've been watching my content for a little bit, please consider subscribing. I post content weekly, and you don't want to miss a thing. Thanks. Graphics and performance. Compared to most next-gen console games, which typically come with 2 graphics modes, Remnant 2 actually comes with 3. They have a quality mode, which targets higher resolution and visual fidelity at 30 frames per second, a balance mode, which has a locked 60 frames per second and lower resolution, and the cream of the crop for these kinds of games, the performance mode, which has an unlocked frame rate and a lower resolution. Now, while playing Remnant 2, I noticed the graphics were a huge leap forward for Gunfire Games compared to From the Ashes. Unreal Engine 5 has really done a lot to enhance their game. I tried out quality and balance modes, and quality just did not cut it for me. And balance was technically fine, but if you have a TV or monitor that will support higher frame rates, the performance mode is definitely the way to go for this one. Game length. Traditionally, when it comes to video games as a whole, Remnant 2 doesn't fit the mold of a traditional story. This is not a game you're going to pick up once, play the story all the way through, and that's that. This game offers procedurally generated storylines, quests, areas, bosses, and even loot. Now, if you're a completionist like me, and you love these kinds of games, then you'll probably play through the 20 to 30 hour campaign multiple times to collect and fight everything in the game. Also, outside of the main story, you have Adventure Mode, which essentially enables story progression on just one world in the game. And each of these runs can take anywhere from 10 to 15 hours respectively. When I consider myself done and satisfied with my journey in Remnant 2, I clocked in around 90 to 100 hours, DLC included, and I could still get more out of the game if that's what I so desired. Story and progression. The story within Remnant 2 centers around survivors in the post-apocalypse, after the world has been destroyed and sucked dry by an interdimensional being known as the Root. After the events of the first game, we've seemingly defeated the Root from destroying our world, but this time, we must stop the Root from destroying all reality as we know it. Remnant 2 is essentially a multiverse game, where we travel to multiple worlds, all totally different from one another, to stop the Root from spreading and consuming these worlds, and in doing so, stopping the Root from gaining strength and consuming all reality. As I've stated earlier, this game features procedurally generated storylines, quests, areas, bosses, and even loot. The first time I played Remnant 2, my experience and progression within the game was entirely different from other people's first experience with the game. But that's the beauty of a game like Remnant 2. You never know what you're going to get. Now, eventually after so many playthroughs and rerolls, you'll start to figure out the game is actually not as large as it seems. It's just the procedurally generated areas do a great job at redecorating itself, to seem unique each time you tread an area. That is something I do love about these games, and it does help with replayability. The game even takes it as far as changing the entire order of worlds you can take on. My game started me off at Yesha, while my friend's playthrough started at Lonesome. So when we decided to boot up the game, and he was showing off his new incredible Nightfall long gun he just acquired, I was shocked to learn that I actually haven't unlocked that part of the game yet. Let alone, when I finally did get the Lonesome, I had a totally different world boss in my playthrough. Yeah, you can consider me salty. Combat. Remnant 2 is about as Souls-like as it comes. Now, I would even go as far as saying that Remnant 2 is probably one of the best Souls-like games not created by From Software. Now, it definitely achieves top 3. With that being said, combat within the game revolves around shooting enemies and bosses and dodging enemy attack patterns until you eventually defeat them. Remnant 2 does have its own spin on things though, through unique interchangeable classes that are known as archetypes. These classes offer special passive bonuses and unique abilities, such as shooting a revolver to deal massive damage, or demanding your dog companion to attack enemies on your behalf. Much like other Souls-likes, you'll have a bonfire to act as a checkpoint, and an area to replenish your hearts. In Remnant 2 though, they're called relics, and are interchangeable with unique perks and passive bonuses, and are essentially this game's equivalents to an Estus flask. Clearing entire mobs of enemies can become increasingly intense at times, but the real standout moments are the bosses and mini-bosses, with runbacks to a fight never becoming too much of a pain in the ass. But overall I felt the game was tough, but fair. Not to mention, they also have a great co-op system, so if you ever get stuck, you can easily have a friend jump into your game, or open a session with randoms and let them join you. I use randoms constantly while playing the game on harder difficulties, and every time it was a great time. and never once did it frustrate me like a game like Destiny 2 does. This game has a great balance. Bosses. The highlight of every great Souls-like, the bosses. And Remnant 2 definitely has a ton of them. Majority of the boss fights in this game have checkpoints right in front of the boss arena, especially the world bosses. And it's a nice change from the typical long run backs you'll find in a FromSoft game. Now, personally, I'm a fan of pain, and I enjoy a grueling run back from time to time, so I was slightly disappointed by the forgiving nature of this game, and the attack patterns in the game can also be a little bit more on the easier side as well. But what's great about a game like Remnant 2 is that they have multiple difficulty settings, so you can up that ante if you so desire. The mini-bosses within the game are called aberrations, and they have a red hue to them, and are basically boss forms of normal mob enemy types in the game that offer special upgrade materials. Then there's the normal unique bosses such as the Red Prince and the Huntress, which have independent stories and lore, and offer more than one way to kill to obtain items to craft unique loot, such as weapon mods, guns, and melee weapons. Now finally we have the big bads, the world bosses. Depending which storyline you roll for your world, on your campaign or adventure mode playthroughs, you'll be designated a world boss. All encounters within that world will remain random, but the world boss will always remain. They typically have the best boss designs and attack patterns, and in some cases are the most challenging. Much like the normal bosses, they have more than one way to kill these bosses to acquire items to craft special loot. And they even have unique story context leading into these fights, which can change the world entirely, along with locking you into specific loot after defeating these bosses. It's all trial and error, and it's fantastic. Loot. Now, make no mistake, Remnant 2 is a Souls-like, but it does have some looter elements to it. For what it doesn't have with random rolls on its weapons, it makes up for in other aspects, such as random procedurally generated areas, bosses, and item placements, which all goes back to the core gameplay elements of a game like Remnant 2, and having to replay the game constantly to acquire everything with random aspects. In most Souls-likes, you just beat the boss and you acquire the weapon, and I know in some instances you'll have a second or even a third playthrough to acquire everything, but in Remnant 2 it just feels different, more in line with a looter shooter with its core gameplay mechanics. They even have friendly, easy co-op, which makes it effortless to shoot mobs with your friends. But with all of that out the way on how you obtain the loot, we have all sorts of things you can collect in this game. The three main pillars are your long gun, your handgun, and your melee weapons. Each of these types of weapons have the ability to get leveled up with the gunsmith to increase its damage output, and they can slot mutators for passive bonuses, as well as interchangeable weapon mods. Unless it's a boss weapon, of course. Then on the build crafting aspects of the game, you have 4 armor slots that all give set stats. And they're just fresh as fuck, dude. Amulets, which are items that give major perk bonuses, which heavily influence the way you'll play, along with 4 slots for rings to further your build customization. And to top it all off, you can obtain multiple different relics that give you more than just one way to heal your survivor besides basic healing. Puzzles and exploration. As I've stated 100 times already, Remnant 2's worlds are procedurally generated. But that doesn't mean that they're totally empty and barren, or short on unique surprises along the way. This game is filled with puzzles and secrets, and honestly, I was surprised by how well procedurally generated worlds were able to pull this off. From finding invisible walls, to floating rocks that look too well placed to not have something hidden on the other side. These kind of secrets really exceeded my expectations. In the beginning of my Remnant 2 journey, I loved its world and all the new things I would find along the way. But I will say that after so many playthroughs, you start to realize that the game's actually not as big or even as random as it seems. It's like the game picks things out of a hat, and you'll get some form of 2 distinct variations of a world, and after that, the game just does a good job dressing it up differently to give the illusion of playing a new area again. But it's really just running the same areas backwards, or just flat out replaying the same missions over and over again sooner than expected. But I have to admit, compared to the first game, Gunfire Games really killed it this time with exploration and secrets, and I hope that the next installment, whenever that is, will be far more ambitious than this. The Awakened King DLC. The Awakened King DLC launched on November 14th, and since its release, I've completed it once and I've started a second adventure mode run. Compared to the other world maps on the main game, I really enjoyed the interconnected nature of this version of Lonesome, and I think the DLC had some standout boss fights, and some great weapon additions, but I will say that the nature of retreading Lonesome again was kind of a cop-out for the DLC. Lots of the areas are just reused assets from prior versions of Lonesome, and at times, they take it so far to where I recognize that certain map layouts were exactly the same from the procedurally generated worlds in the main game. Story-wise, the DLC was fun, and if you like Remnant 2, then this is a must-buy. I know for myself, I already had the DLC with the deluxe version of the game, but for the price of $10 you cannot beat it. The new subclass, the Ritualist, is fun to play with, and I love the witch-themed armor set you can obtain. If I had to put a number on the DLC, it would be an 8 out of 10. It's definitely worth the money for $10, but it's simply more Remnant 2 without doing anything substantial. The new subclass, boss fights, and weapons add great replay value, but it doesn't do enough to make me come back for more. Final score, 8.5 out of 10. Remnant 2 as a whole is a game that I enjoyed very much. After 2 story mode playthroughs, countless adventure mode runs, and my time with the DLC, I would even consider it a must play for Souls-like games. It's a huge improvement upon From the Ashes, and they took the approach of adding more new strong weapons and armor pieces than relying on making us obtain ones from the first game again. Some classics do return, and that was greatly appreciated, but I would love to see them bring back more classics from the series in a third entry, and really capture that Dark Souls 3 feel from what came before lore-wise. The additions of updated build crafting was also something I loved playing around with, and I enjoyed the updated traits and archetype system this time around. Overall, Remnant 2 is a game I think will stand the test of time, and if we ever get a third game, this one will stand tall, being a highlight for the series. Now thank you guys so much if you stayed the entire time. Remnant 2 is an incredible game, which blends aspects of looter shooter while remaining all gun souls at the same time. Now let me know in the comments section what you guys think about Remnant 2. Does it have aspects of looter shooter in it? And if so, how does it compare to other Souls-likes within the genre? Let me know all of it in the comments section. Now remember to like, comment, subscribe, do anything you guys can to help me. I am just one guy, and I make these videos because it is my passion. So thank you very much. Have a nice day. This has been DrewSpacely. Peace. Sorry, one more thing. I wasted a lot of time and energy on this boss review for Armored Core 6, so please go check it out.